Hey guys, I don't know if you've heard, but there's this game that came out recently. I think it's some sort of like spin-off of Hollow Knight. It's like Silksong or something. I don't know. I don't think it's that big of a deal. So let's just talk about Hollow Knight. Anyway, before Silksong blessed us with its presence and absolutely obliterated every online game store, I replayed Hollow Knight, just like literally everyone else on the internet. And towards the end of my playthrough, I thought, let's try the Path of Pain again. What could go wrong? Horrid agony and suffering aside, while I was trudging through the path, it got me thinking about the White Palace and the Pale King. Namely, why in heaven's name were there so many buzzsaws? Like, seriously. We love to meme about it, and it is hilarious to think that the main reason why Hallow Nest collapsed wasn't because of a vengeful goddess making everyone go mad, but because the Pale King used all of the city's resources to fuel his ever-growing buzzsaw addiction. It's been a running gag in the Hollow Knight community for a long time. But there's gotta be a reason besides a joke and besides being an obstacle for parkour. This is my attempt at finding that reason. This is a theory, though perhaps it's more of an analysis of the Pale King's character than anything else. Either way, here is why the White Palace has so many dang buzzsaws. Everyone, say hello to the Pale King. This guy is responsible for basically the entire plot of the game. He's a higher being, the equivalent of deities in this world. Specifically, he's the evolved form of a worm, an immortal being whose instincts are to literally pull bugs into their thrall, or in other words, to pull bugs into their service, or to be worshipped. And so, the Pale King founded Hollow Nest, the self-proclaimed eternal kingdom. Along with Crossroads and cities, the Pale King had a palace built for him, the White Palace. It's located in the Ancient Basin, a barren region located entirely beneath the city and all of the other regions. According to Lem, the Pale King was rarely seen. He spent practically all of his time tucked away in his palace. But while he was reclusive, we can also find tons of statues and monuments of him. His insignia and his likeness are seen everywhere. In the very architecture of the city, to a massive statue tucked away in the Queen's gardens, to the little Hallow Nest seals. So what does this, him hiding in the White Palace and the multitude of monuments made in his honor, tell us about the Pale King? Well, for one thing, we don't actually know if the Pale King commissioned all of these monuments. That could have very well have been the bugs who were infatuated with their ruler. We don't even know if he made the king's idols, tokens that were given to those most dedicated to their king. We know a lot about what he was, a higher being, and what he did, building the kingdom, but we don't actually know who he was. So, back to that question. What does all of this tell us about his character? It's very easy to simply claim that the Pale King had an ego the size of Texas, what with the whole kingdom dedicated to his worship thing. But there are some crucial details this interpretation ignores. Mainly, it is a worm's nature to gather and civilize creatures, for better or for worse. Base instinct isn't enough justification, however, so let's look a little deeper. Why would the Pale King spend his life hidden in his White Palace if he was so eager for bugs to worship him? Well, this could be a sign of insecurity. The bugs revered him as a god, but when you actually look at him, he doesn't seem nearly as godlike as the Radiance, or the White Lady, or even his old form as a worm. He may have feared shattering this holy image of himself the bugs of Hallow Nest had crafted. Okay, so the Pale King is insecure. Let's consider what else he did and see if it fits into that idea. Specifically, what he did when the infection, created by the Radiance, reared its ugly head. When the infection first began to appear in the Flourishing Kingdom and proved to be unstoppable, the Pale King devised a plan. He was aware of the Void, a mysterious dark substance said to rival the power of higher beings. The Void is the ancient enemy of the Radiance, though it's unclear if the Pale King knew this or not. What he did know, or at least what he thought, was that Void could be controlled. In the White Palace, the player can find the King's workshop, a cluttered room with the shelves of wings molds and a mold for the king's molds, two creatures made of void created to serve and protect the Pale King. This proves that the Pale King spent some time working with void before coming upon the idea of a vessel. A vessel would be an empty being devoid of thought or will. This would allow them immunity to the infection, which required thoughts and dreams in order to take hold of the victim. This vessel would then take in the source of the infection, the Radiance, and imprison her indefinitely. Sounds like a good plan, right? Sure, but the process of creating the vessels was cruel. We know that the Pale King had a union with the White Lady, a plant-like creature who is another higher being called Root. This is proved by the description of the King's Soul Charm, which is a combination of 2 white fragments, one given by the White Lady and the other taken from the Pale King's corpse. The description reads, "Holy charm symbolizing a union between higher beings." With this union, the Pale King convinced the White Lady to help him create these vessels. After a dalliance, they left their eggs in the abyss, the home of the void, so that their children would be born of void, of emptiness. In the game, we can see the sheer extent of vessels that were born and left to rot. This doesn't paint a very good image of the Pale King. We can assume that he was heartless. He didn't care for lower beings, only for his kingdom and his status as its ruler. Or we can assume that he was desperate. His kingdom was crumbling before his very eyes. How was he supposed to defeat an enemy as powerful and ancient as the Radiants? Personally, I'm inclined to believe the latter. Why? Well, the Pale King's plan wasn't just to create a vessel. Once one was selected, who we will call Hollow, and trust me, we'll get back to them in a bit, he needed a place where Hollow would seal the Radiance and forever remain. This ended up being the Temple of the Black Egg. To seal it shut, he had 3 bugs lay in an eternal sleep, using their souls as locks. 2 of these bugs, Monomon and Lurian, agreed without complaint. But the third, Hera, would only agree if the Pale King conceived a child with her to secure her bloodline. If the Pale King were egotistical, why would he ever allow a conception between him and a common bug? This is one of the reasons why I think he acted out of desperation, and maybe even fear. With the Dreamer selected, all that was left was for the pure vessel, Hollow, to focus the radiance within, locking the source of the infection away, and to then be sealed in the Black Egg. This works, for a time, but it fails because of one crucial little detail. In the game, the White Lady tells us that the Hollow Knight, that pure vessel, wasn't actually completely hollow. They were tarnished by an idea instilled. We're never told what this idea was, but it is strongly implied to be something along the lines of a bond with the Pale King. It could be a desire to fulfill their purpose for the sake of their father and the kingdom. It could be love or adoration for the king. It could be anything along those lines. Where did this idea come from? We can only assume that the Pale King, through probably spending a lot of time with Hollow, grew close with the vessel. This is supported by the hidden cutscene the player can find after going through the Path of Pain, easily the hardest parkour level in the game. Once you complete it, you're greeted with this short scene between the Pale King and a young Hollow. It's a simple moment, merely the king and his vessel sharing a glance, but such a scene speaks volumes. We'll delve deeper into that later in the video, but the fact is that the Pale King was the one responsible for Hollow's failure. Or at least, I believe that's how he saw it. He spent time with the vessel. He was the one who formed a bond. He was the one who tarnished them with an idea instilled. Let's jump forward a little in the timeline. So, Hollow wasn't completely hollow, which led to the second wave of infection. The moment the Pale King realized that his plan failed, that all of those sacrifices, all of that time and effort was all for naught, he fled. We don't know how, exactly, but he took his entire White Palace and stuffed it inside of a single king's mold. He escaped into a sort of dream realm. There, with echoes of his royal retainers and a few mindless molds, he rotted. It is there, in the highest room of the palace, that we find the Pale King's corpse in the game. Silent, alone, and utterly powerless. Pretty grim, right? Well, tragedies aside, let's quickly review what we've learned about the Pale King's character. Despite being a higher being, and despite building a kingdom dedicated to his worship, the Pale King spent practically all of his time hidden away in his palace. Either this means he was a coward or insecure, or both. He also wasn't egotistical or arrogant, or at least his desperation overpowered any arrogance as he engaged in a relationship with Hera, a common bug. And when the infection began, we know that the Pale King became desperate and feared the Radiance. And last but not least, the Pale King formed a bond with the vessel he selected from the Abyss. He ended up being responsible for the Hollow Knight's failure. After that, he hid in the White Palace until his death, another indication of fear and another emotion that I have yet to mention: shame. I believe that single emotion is the thing responsible for the state of the White Palace we see in the game. So hold on to that thought. We'll work our way back here after we go over the White Palace itself. In the game, the White Palace is basically a massive obstacle course. It acts as a late-game challenge for players to find the King's Soul to unlock other late-game things. So, if we were to believe that the palace we see in the game is how the actual palace was, then the architects had a lot of fun designing it. But here's the thing, the palace we see in the game isn't the actual palace. Remember what I said about the Pale King fleeing into a sort of dream realm? This palace is in the mind of a king's mold. It isn't the real palace, it's an imitation of it in the dream realm. As I was researching for this video in the form of Google searches and browsing the Hollow Knight wiki, I stumbled upon this Reddit post by this user who had a really interesting theory. I didn't see this mentioned anywhere else. They theorized that the Dreamworld White Palace isn't a one-to-one copy of the true White Palace, but a guarded mind version of a royal guard, placed to guard the secrets of the Pale King from the moths, and also acting as a guiding place for a worthy new vessel in case the Hollow Knight, pure vessel, failed. I'm thinking of something similar, except for a few tweaks. First, I don't think the Royal Guard, which is a king's mold, is capable of creating its own dream world. It isn't capable of thought. It's entirely made from void and pressed with a single idea of protection. When you dream nail a king's mold, it only says either kill or defend. This is the result of the Pale King tampering with void and giving it single focus. So, while the Pale King could have taught this king's mold about a white palace full of traps and hazards, I think instead the Pale King took his palace and used the king's mold as a kind of vessel. Not like these guys, but as an empty pocket he could fill with his own dream world, a world where he could hide. Another theory I've seen bounced around is that the Pale King's palace was an obstacle course used to train vessels, but I don't think he would have transported these hundreds of vessels to the palace, had them go through the course, then bothered to clean up the hundreds that failed and dump them back into the abyss. The vessel's eggs were left in the abyss so that they would be consumed by void upon birth, and there they stayed. We can see the eggs in the background, and we find the one where the player character came from during a late game sequence. As for the trial to choose which vessel would be the Hollow Knight, I believe that was simply climbing out of the abyss. The first one to do so and be claimed hollow by the Pale King was chosen. So then, why the obstacle course? Why the buzzsaws and thorns and spikes? It all comes back to that emotion I mentioned earlier, shame. The buzzsaws and thorns and spikes, all of these hazards that could harm anyone, even the Pale King himself, are a manifestation of his shame, of his grief, his fears, his regrets, all of it. Let's start with the thorns. These are just as abundant as the buzzsaws. It makes the palace feel overgrown with them, similar to how the Queen's gardens have now become overrun with thorns. And who do we find in the gardens? The White Lady, who, as we know, is a plant-like being, a being of root. See the connection? Remember that union I mentioned between the White Lady and the Pale King? Well, it didn't last. After the whole baby-killing thing, the Pale King and the White Lady separated. The White Lady retreated into the Queen's gardens, where she bound herself to prevent her seed from spreading. She tells us this when the player character finds her. She specifically says, "These bindings about me I've chosen to erect. There is some shame I feel from my own part in the deed, and this method guarantees its cease." The deed, she mentions, is the creation of the vessels. I know this is a bit of a stretch, but if the White Lady feels such shame as to bind herself like this, then I can imagine the Pale King being similarly ashamed. It certainly aligns with his actions. While the White Lady bound herself in her gardens, the Pale King abandoned his kingdom to hide in a dream recreation of his palace. You can also find these branch or root-looking things in the background of the palace, only strengthening that connection to the White Lady. As for the other hazards, well, we know that Hallownest went through a kind of industrial revolution. We see it in the architecture with the lifts and the trams. This sort of machinery is integral to the kingdom. What do we see in the palace? Buzzsaws and spikes, both metallic, both harsh, both used in heavy, dangerous machinery. They are a manifestation of the Pale King's desire of an eternal kingdom through the usage of industry and construction, warped by its failure. There are a few other things found in the palace as well. First, the Pale King's soul totems. These could be a representation of the Pale King's power, his potential as a higher being. Interestingly, however, his soul totems are limited. From what I could find, the amount of soul in these are the same as other large soul totems. We'll get back to that in a second. We can also find royal retainers. These guys are the most loyal and devout servants to the king. They can only be found alive in the palace. In the physical world, there are only a handful of corpses scattered about the ancient basin and the Abyss Lighthouse. But here's the thing. These guys aren't real. When struck, they vanish into essence, and they reflexively bow to the player characters since they have the king's brand. If they were the real retainers, since they were so extremely loyal to the Pale King, I think they would have hesitated to bow to this random, strange little bug. The retainers are just another manifestation of what once was, the only ones remaining from the devoted kingdom of Hallownest. And finally, there are some wings molds and king's molds. I think these are pretty self-explanatory. They are the Pale King's creations after all, and the palace, specifically in the workshop, are where they were made. Okay, we've talked a whole lot about the White Palace. Now it's time to talk about everyone's favorite challenge in the game, the Path of Pain. We're going to tie everything together. As I mentioned before, the Path of Pain hides that simple moment between Hollow and the Pale King, the proof that the king cared about this vessel, which led to the vessel's failure in containing the radiance. With all this talk about symbolism and manifestations, let's take a gander at what's in the Path of Pain and see if everything lines up. To even get to the path in the first place, the player needs to break a hidden wall in this random room. There's our first connection to shame. This whole sequence, this memory, is tucked away in the furthest corner of the palace. The Pale King literally has walls around it. After going through the hidden passageway, the player finds this seal of binding with Hollow's horns in the center. Upon completing the path, this entry is unlocked in the Hunter's Journal, which says that the seal of binding is used to contain a powerful force, or to preserve something of great importance. We see seals of binding in lots of places for protection, but it's interesting to see it here on the wall. I can only assume this binding is here to preserve something of great importance, that something being this memory of the Pale King and Hollow, this dark secret, the sole reason behind the vessel's failure. This is only further proven when you read the lore tablet found beside the seal. It reads, "To witness secrets sealed, one must endure the harshest punishment." We know what the secret is, but it's interesting that they use the word punishment. Not challenge, but punishment. This further proves the Pale King's regret and shame. Interestingly, this is the only place with soul totems in the form of the pure vessel, and these totems have infinite soul. Ignoring the fact that this is Team Cherry granting mercy for their players so that they don't run out of soul while attempting the Path of Pain, this could also be a representation of the Pale King's love for the pure vessel. He views the pure vessel as one strong enough to contain his mortal enemy, the rival god, the Radiance, whereas he views himself as lackluster, evident by the fact that his soul totems are limited. And of course, the path holds a multitude of thorns, buzzsaws, and spikes, and at the very end, as a last line of defense, there are 2 king's molds. We can also see a part of that seal of binding in the background again. So there's my theory. The buzzsaws, spikes, thorns, and the maze-like interior of the White Palace are all a manifestation and a symbol of the Pale King's shame for his failures. Still not convinced? Well, as the last nail in the coffin, here's some dialogue for the mask maker after the player has acquired the Shade Cloak. He says, "Has it witnessed that truth most tragic? The worm's great shame sealed away." Well, can't argue with that. If the mask maker said it, that obviously makes it 100% true and irrefutable. In his shame, the Pale King fled his internal kingdom, and as he created and lived in his dream world, that shame manifested into the White Palace we experience in the game. Makes the whole place feel a lot more haunting, doesn't it? Well, if you can ignore the screeching of buzzsaws, that is. Maybe Team Cherry only added those to make our ears bleed. Who knows? I know this is more of a sympathetic look at the Pale King's character. Obviously, I don't think he's a very good guy. Desperate, yes, and probably insecure in some way, yes, but not a good person. I just think that makes him more interesting. It really makes you think about what he must have been like. How did he treat Hollow exactly? How did he treat Hornet? We can really only guess, which I think is really fun. Hence this entire video. Whew, that was a lot. Thanks for watching all the way through. I'm sure there are plenty of holes in this theory, but that's just the nature of Hollow Knight's lore. What do you guys think about the White Palace? How do you interpret the Pale King's character? What did I miss? Let me know in the comments. I'm actually really curious to see what other people think. I'm not just saying that. As always, subscribe if you want to see more. I'm not finished with Silksong since I want to take my time with it after waiting 6 years, so I can't guarantee I'll make a video about it. If I find something I want to talk about, then I'll make one. I'm also open to making more about Hollow Knight, so let me know if you have any ideas. Alrighty, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye!